Monica, if you could sort of monitor the chat box, and I know you can't see the hands, can you, Monica?
No, Zoom doesn't want me to see the virtual hands.
That's funny, but not good. So I will monitor the hands, you monitor the chat box, and we'll see how we can do this.
Yeah.
If
So
you all have any questions or anything you want to say at all, just let me know and I'll stop and to clarify points, okay? So here are our virtual norms for our session. Please keep your default mute on. Facilitator is going to call on individuals during the Q&A to dialogue. You can unmute yourself at that time if you're called on, but please keep yourself muted unless you just raise your hand and we'll call on you. During the session, you may type your questions or comments using the chat feature. Monica is going to look for novel or pattern questions to address. And we'll review the chat after the session and share an FAQ document with responses to any questions that we didn't get to during the session. I don't think that that's going to happen, but I think we'll get to every question, seeing as how there are only 12 or 13 participants. Okay. During the session, we'll also take virtually raised hands that we talked about. Please raise your hand. The raise hand function is at the bottom of the participant list. You all are probably pros at this already, having used this tool now for the last week and a half. If you do make a comment or you have a question, try to keep your comments or questions to less than a minute to honor everyone's time. And the session is going to be recorded so that others can see it asynchronously. And we will go ahead and let's see, I'm going to try to start recording it as soon as I figure out how to do that.
it looks like it is. It says it's recording. Yeah,
it is recording right now. Okay, perfect. All right. Okay, let me see if there's any questions yet. Nope, we're good. All right, folks, so the goals for this session are to understand general expectations of CRT certified applicants. We say general because this journey is so individualized and people are getting what they're getting out of it. And we never would want to make the program so prescriptive that you can't show who you truly are and what you've truly learned, and your individual relationships with students and the importance of those. So these are general expectations, and this is what we're looking at when we're looking at your materials. We're also going to consider the CRT scoring guide and look at that rubric from 1 through 4, and then we're going to view and discuss exemplars at each scoring level. All right. There are some other resources at the bottom of this page. Lars is doing a session today on finding and documenting CRT impact, and you can find our general work slides linked here. Also, the culturally responsive educator framework and self-assessment is linked here, as well as the CRT certification website. That's for ease of access. All right, so just looking to see if there's any questions yet. Feel free to raise your hand. Anything from the chat box, Monica, you want to say or add?
No, I think we're doing okay. Although I now know how to do hand raising thanks to Katie. So thank you, Katie.
Katie is like a genius. She's getting in the chat box here and telling us what we need to do. I need to have her on every Zoom with me.
Yeah.
Tech support. All right. Okay, so you'll notice that we have an expectation of applicants here. Every applicant must provide clear evidence they have deep understanding of CRT and have applied the 3 characteristics of CRT to increase student achievement. That's a very general statement that's been in existence since the beginning of this program, but we have some more specifics this year that we're working through. So as you all know, we would like you to provide evidence that you've demonstrated 3 characteristics through the 9 sub-indicators. And it would be helpful in your submission materials if you list, not necessarily list, but include as headings those 9 sub-indicators. On the submission form, we'll also ask you to identify the 9 sub-indicators so that assessors know what they're looking for, okay? Applicants must provide evidence of student learning and growth as a result of their application of culturally responsive teaching. A lot of people ask me, do you have to show evidence of student learning and growth for each of the sub-indicators? And the answer is no. You should show student learning and growth as a result of the characteristic in general. So we'll be scoring based on the characteristics and not on the sub-indicators. The sub-indicators just give you an opportunity to demonstrate, to show how you demonstrated application in a more specific way. And I can answer more questions about that. Applicants must also show the impact of their professional learning and cite their professional learning specifically. And to receive a certification award, applicants must obtain a 3 or higher on the CRT assessment rubric. Okay, now I'm looking to see if there's any hands. And Monica, anything in the chat box?
Nope, we're good so far.
Wow. Okay, let us know if you have any questions. I'm going to stop after every slide just to make sure. Okay, so here's our scoring guide. And this scoring guide is at the top of your CRT self-assessment, so you should be familiar with it. But we're going to go ahead and talk through each of the different levels to make sure that it's abundantly clear what these levels mean. So in level 1, understanding, this is a relative growth opportunity in the candidate's practice. The candidate has a general understanding of what the standard means, but it's not clear that the candidate puts this into practice. In level 2, that's an applying level. That means that there's more of an emergent competency, and the candidate's picture of how to implement the standard has grown, and the candidate can share at least one example of how they do this at the characteristic level. So it would be as if a candidate in a characteristic level only showed one sub-indicator rather than a sub-indicator per indicator. Okay? In level 3, that's an affecting and reflecting phase. This is an emergent strength area in the candidate's practice, and the candidate provides examples, so 2 or more, of how they apply this standard, the effect on student learning, and then there's reflection on their professional development in this area. So those 3 things: examples, effect on student learning, and reflection on professional development. In level 4, that's the impacting achievement level. And you can clearly see that this is a mission or a strength area in the candidate's practice. We wrote that the candidate embodies the standard in a variety of ways. So what does it mean to embody a standard? It means that this person is, they're ready and they're able and they have a plan for how to apply the standard. They also provide clear evidence of student growth as a result. They might even provide clear evidence that they've narrowed achievement gaps in their classroom or context. The candidate provides examples of reflection on their professional development. And here's an added extra: they could also teach other educators in this area. They might even show that they have taught other educators in this area. That's level 4. So we're going to go through each of these levels one at a time, and we're going to see an exemplar for each level. Any questions?
Yes. So we have a question from Emily about the way that the essay is structured and organized. So she said that the sub-indicators are embedded, but it's more of a story and less like subheading indicator explanation. Is there a preference? Is that okay?
I think that the narrative form of the essay is perfectly fine, just as long as the sub-indicators are very clear. Like, which sub-indicators did you tackle, and are they clear in your essay? In your portfolio, they should be abundantly clear. So if you're using Google Slides, you might want to make one slide per sub-indicator. That would make it very clear that you have gone from a level 2 to a level 3, that you have more than one example of how you've applied it.
I would think in the essay, almost like using them as like in-text citations of like, indicator, 3.3F or whatever it is, like within sentences will help the assessors kind of tease that out in the essay in a way that doesn't like mess with your narrative flow.
Yeah, that's a great point, Monica, but I can also see it being used as subheadings.
Yes.
So either way, but just as long as it's clear. Emily, does that answer your question? Great.
Yes. When I had it arranged by subheadings, the paper just just wasn't flowing. So I just want to make sure it was okay. I still feel like they're clear, but it's not organized like that.
Mm-hmm. You might, as a heading, put characteristic 1 and then put the sub-indicators you tackled right under that, and then write for characteristic 1, if that makes sense. If you're putting all of the characteristics together, then Monica's suggestion to use the, what did you call that, inline reference?
In-text citations.
In-text citation. That just means putting parentheses when a sentence finishes and writing the sub-indicator in those parentheses.
Okay.
That works perfectly fine as well. Okay.
We have more questions. So are we applying the scoring guide per indicator or per sub-indicator? So per characteristic or per,
The scoring guide is applied per characteristic. So looking at all of your work in the indicators and in the sub-indicators and applying this through the characteristic level. So you would get, like, for instance, a score of 3 on characteristic 1, a score of 4 on characteristic 2, a score of 3 on characteristic 3. You notice I just made you, like, made that hypothetical person do great. So that's what we want to see. We want to see that. You're likely not to get 4s in every area. And that's okay. This is a rigorous assessment process. But again, you need to get a level 3 or higher on each of the characteristics to become certified.
And then one last one from the chat box. To be clear, we do not need specific evidence for each sub-indicator, but we do need specific evidence for each characteristic.
The assessors want to know how you've applied each of the characteristics. Show through your sub-indicators that you have more than one example of how you've applied the characteristic to get to a level 3. Show student learning and growth at the characteristic level. Show professional development either at the indicator level or at the characteristic level. This will hopefully become more clear as we go through our exemplars. Hollins, I saw your hand up. Do you have a question? Let me unmute you. There you go. You're not unmuted. Hold on. I'll get better at this, people. Okay, go ahead, Helen.
So is there a separate score given for the essay and the portfolio, or is there, so if I'm putting together the essay and it's characteristic 1, is there a separate score given for the essay component and the portfolio component, or are they sort of read simultaneously and given one overall score?
It's so the assessors are going to look at all of your materials holistically.
Okay.
If they see that there's a hole in your essay, they're going to go, like investigators, go try to find it in your portfolio.
Okay, that makes sense.
Then your portfolio presentation is just an added layer on top of that for you to clear up any misunderstandings or fill any holes that you think might be unclear.
Okay, so do we want separate, in my, the way I've been thinking about it, and tell me if this is off, but I was thinking that the essay, that the evidence in my portfolio was going to be sort of a visual representation of the narrative in my essay. I don't need separate pieces of evidence for portfolio versus essay, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
I think about it that way too. I think of the essay as a narration or a more academic description of what's happened. And then your portfolio as a way to produce visual evidence.
Yeah, and even like would artifacts go in the portfolio part?
Absolutely.
Like that's what I was thinking. Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Monica, do you have anything to add to that?
Sorry, I'm muted. I forgot. No, I think that that's great. I also found in my own process that I could fit more in my portfolio than I could fit in my essay. So the portfolio is almost like an expansion on the essay part. Emily did ask, is the portfolio the same thing as the presentation?
Good question.
Yeah.
Really good question. So I've seen people do this a couple of ways. It's your choice. Some people will create like a larger portfolio, say on Google Slides, that is 30 slides long. Then when they do the portfolio presentation, they either one, click through and talk about the slides that are most important in it, or two, create a separate slideshow that's very focused, that has less than 10 slides, and that helps guide you through your presentation. You could do it either way, but we ask that when you submit your portfolio and your essay, you do that together on the submission date, and then you'll have extra time until your portfolio presentation to create any other materials that you want to present. We're not gonna, that's not subject to that due date. We just ask that you give us those materials the day before you present them so that we can follow along during your portfolio presentation. But that portfolio presentation slideshow is uniquely for you. It's for you to guide you, and you can do it however you want to, Emily. Okay, all right. Monica, is there anything else, or should we move on?
I think we can move on.
All right, perfect. I like all these questions. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about level 1. Okay, so level 1 is really just the understanding level, and it demonstrates general understanding of what the characteristic means. It may show an intention or desire to understand or implement the characteristic. So it's like there are good intentions there. There are great intentions there. In fact, sometimes teachers will talk about how they wish they could do something that they were not able to do in level 1. But it's not the intention that we're looking at necessarily. It's these other things. It's the specific professional learning, it's the application, the impact on student learning, and ability to teach others that might be missing at level 1. Okay, so let's go ahead and show an example of level 1. Okay, and this level 1 example is based on characteristic 1.2b. I invite the cultures represented by my students and their communities into my classroom through content connections and problem or project-based learning. I'm going to go ahead and read this one. Monica, if it's okay, I'm going to ask you to read one as well, and then we'll take 2 volunteers. Sound good? Okay.
Sure.
Level 1. I enjoy exploring the cultures of my students. Sometimes I make time in class for students to talk about their cultural experiences. Other times, I start lessons by reading articles about cultural experiences that are similar to some of my students' experiences. I have a student from Afghanistan who has a hard time engaging in my curriculum, and once I used an article about his home country to try to inspire him. I think it worked. He seemed to really connect to this kind of information, even though I feel like I could spend more time in this area. If it weren't for the required SOLs, I think we'd spend a lot more time reflecting on relevant content. So go ahead in the chat box and say what you think, why you think that this is a level 1. What is showing you that this is a level 1? And type your answer in the chat box, please. Okay, good. So far I'm seeing Katie. I feel like I could spend more time in this area. So this is an intention, but it's not necessarily showing consistent application. And someone said, yeah, Holland said they're not consistently putting anything into practice. Emily says, no clear data to support what the teacher thinks. Good point. Monica, anything else that you're seeing there?
Yeah, I think Katie, adding on to that, he seemed to really connect. Like she didn't actually, or they didn't actually follow up with the student and be able to know anything. They're just reacting, dipping toes into learning more about cultures from Vicky. Yeah, it's very shallow. I think, you know, there's some allusion to the fact that the understanding of culture is also shallow as just as ethnicities and not not actually going deeper than that, right? Just being from Afghanistan.
Good point. It's sometimes at this level that people have a generalized or stereotypical view of culture and ethnicity. Again, we're not looking for somebody to say, well, he's Latino, so he learns like this. That would be a shallow understanding of what culture means, but more that I noticed from understanding his family more and from seeing how he works and from hearing the things that he said, that he is a collectivist learner. And this is the way that he likes to make decisions or something like that. So that would be a deeper root level look at culture.
I also feel like this particular example does something that a lot of educators do that are new to this work or not experienced, and that's pushing the blame onto outward things, right? Like if it weren't for the SOLs, we could do this all the time, instead of looking within the locus of control and what we do have control over and what we are able to impact.
Awesome. Okay, let's go on to level 2 for the sake of time. So this is an applying level. So we see here that the understanding of how to apply the characteristic has actually increased at this point. And how to implement it has increased. In fact, the educator can share at least one specific example of how the characteristic is applied. There may not be at this level a reflection on professional learning or an impact on student learning or a capacity to teach others in this area. So let's take a look at what this looks like. All right, Monica, I saved a longer one for you.
All right. At the beginning of the year, it was obvious to me that the white American students were choosing to separate themselves from students of color and ESOL students in my class. I purposefully then rearranged the seating and put them in different math teams to work together. I gave them collaborative projects to complete in algebra class. They worked on problems together, completed study guides together, and worked on other activities as a group. This cooperative learning technique helped to improve the communication skills of the ESOL students and enabled the whole group to manage conflict as it arose, jointly taking ownership of the project as a group. With the use of multicultural instruction and cooperative learning, students' personal growth has been accelerated. By getting to know each other, it has broken down their defense mechanisms and their desire to withdraw into ethnic groups, and they are getting to know each other as real people rather than stereotypes. This technique evidently has created mutual respect and has developed friendship that was not there before.
Great. This is based on characteristic 1.2D. I didn't say before. I intentionally create opportunities for my community of learners to identify, address, and counteract stereotypes or assumptions that can be damaging to marginalized communities. So go ahead and type in the chat box. Why do you think that this is a level 2 and not a level 1 or a level 3? There are some nuances here that are make it a little bit more challenging. Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
So Katie's saying, I'm not sure. It sounds like this person tried many ways to implement this standard. That's true. They might have multiple examples at this level. That is accurate. And then Katie goes on to say, but there's no data.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
So,
Jane points out there's an intentional shift, but no like follow through.
mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Kristen says, I think this teacher goes a bit further than the last by specifically describing the way they increase interactions
Right.
for the students to learn cooperative. Absolutely. They got pretty specific at some points too about how they did cooperative learning and how they created opportunities for students to break down stereotypes and assumptions. That is true.
I think Vicky's right that it's kind of incomplete. Like, so there is a shift in practice with cooperative learning in order to break down stereotypes, but she doesn't mention the specific like multicultural instruction or what stereotypes. Like, it's almost like the teacher kind of just let the kids do it themselves
Mm-hmm.
without that kind of follow through from the teacher.
Mm-hmm. Good points. Again, what are we missing? We're missing specific impact on students. So it's not really enough to say that it created mutual respect. I want to be able to see how you know that. How do you know it created mutual respect? Do you have some affective data? Do you have student surveys? Do you have quotes from students? Do you have any proof that it developed friendships that didn't exist before? Okay.
We need more specifics.
Right, and one other thing we're also missing is professional learning. So where did you get this idea that cooperative learning techniques would counteract stereotypes? And what intentional effort did you make to not let it just be about the algebra work, but also intentionally counteracting stereotypes?
Yeah, I want to know what makes this work culturally responsive and not just good teaching.
Right.
Cooperative learning is can be a part of culturally responsive practice, but by itself is not necessarily responsive.
Okay, awesome. All right, I'm looking for hands to see if anybody wants to talk more about it. Okay, all right, well then let's move to number 3 for the sake of time. Okay, at this level, there becomes a more clear understanding of what the characteristic means and how to implement it. In fact, the applicant shows more than one specific example of how the characteristic is applied and reflects on professional learning specifically, and also shows impact on student learning. They might not show that they have the capacity or experience to teach others in this area yet, but they'll get there. So level 3 is where all of the certification candidates need to be in to become certified at each of the characteristic levels.
Leilani, can you advance the slide? We're still on the example.
Oh.
I don't know why.
Are you there now?
Nope.
Huh. Let's get out of there and try again.
Yep.
Let's reboot.
Beautiful face.
Let's reboot.
There we go.
Is that level 3?
Yep.
Is that the chart?
Yes.
Okay, good. So I'll let you consider that for a moment. Okay. Let's go ahead now and take a look at a level 3 exemplar. There we go. Okay, a little bit longer. Would somebody with their eyes on it like to volunteer to read it? And if not, I will. Volunteers. Okay, I'll read it. Oh, thank you. Who's that?
Katie.
Hi, Katie. Thank you, Katie.
All right, since I grew up in a cultural context that is very different from many of my ESOL students, I spend time at the beginning of the year surveying my students and making personal connections around culture with my students and their families. I then try to connect my curriculum to their experiences so what they have to learn feels more relevant to them. Zaretta Hammond talks about connecting new knowledge to prior knowledge whenever possible as a method of CRT. In one example, I developed a language arts unit that centers around student choice, given a set of multicultural texts that draw from the cultural groups in my classroom. In another instance, I built a unit that centers personal identity in a personal narrative writing project. Using the opportunity, most students shared significant personal and/or cultural experiences that had impacted their lives with the class. I have tracked how this process impacts their desire to learn by giving an engagement survey, and the results show that they are much more engaged when I ignite their learning with relevant content. I have grown in this area, and I've also seen promising results in their formative assessments from last semester to this semester.
Okay, so just imagine that everything that's underlined is a link. So there are 4 possible links in this excerpt. This is based off of characteristic 3.1a. I make personal and meaningful connections with students and their families around culture, interests, and class content in order to enhance student achievement. So why is this a level 3? Do you see any contrast between a level 2 in this? And why might it not be a level 4 yet? Go ahead and type your answers into the chat box. We'll see what you say.
Yeah, with clear measurement, specific growth, citing sources. There is some data. Emily says maybe not a 4 because there's not necessarily an impact on achievement that is shown in this particular excerpt.
Sorry. So imagine that the links do show an impact. There, we can't link it here. But imagine that their formative assessments were impacted, as this person has said, that their engagement has been impacted.
Yeah, Vicki points out that it might not be a 4 because it's not showing how they're able to teach others.
Yes.
If you click ahead, that's
Sorry.
that last checkbox. No.
I'm sorry. I'm just. I'll get some with this. Okay.
Well, and I like Kristen's pointing out that there's a specific unit that where they're clearly tying their CRT work to a unit and then the student achievement results, right? So we've got the planning all the way through to the impact that it had, and we know that it's clearly from CRT work and not just from good teaching.
Right.
So I love that.
All right.
Hollins has a hand.
Go ahead, Hollins.
All right, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, I have 2 questions. One is, I noticed that in this sample, she or he wove the professional learning into the example as part of the sort of narrative around this specific unit. I had been approaching it kind of differently, like looking at sort of as a separate paragraph around professional learning for each of the indicators. Is that like, should I do I need to weave it into each example, or should what do you think there? That's my first question, is like, is professional learning, I pulled it out only because the guiding questions have it as a separate guiding question, and I like responded to that guiding question. And then the second thing is, if the difference between my understanding is the main difference between this level 3 and a level 4 would be the ability to teach others.
Mhm.
But I'm missing that in the guiding questions because I'm not seeing that as something to be responding to in the essay. And so is that something people should be including as they're writing? How answering the question, do you have an example of how this is it just like your ability to teach others, or do you have to have evidence that you have taught others? Does that make sense?
Sure. Okay, so the first question that you had about the professional learning, I would say that it is fine to build it in as a separate paragraph in answering the guiding questions. And it is also okay to embed it when you talk about lesson planning. So we might want to see a strong connection there between what you learned and how it changed you as an educator, and then what you did with it. Feels like a natural progression there. Monica, do you have any other answer for that first question there?
No, although I would like to point out that this example does have like an actual citation of professional learning, right, which I think is helpful, and just is a little more professional. Sorry, it's the librarian in me, I can't help it.
Yeah, I count on you to point out the essay features. Okay, so your second question, Hollins, you're right. There isn't a guiding question. I think that's actually might be an oversight on our part. And when we talked about level 4 and embodying the standard, I think that there are some key things that assessors might be looking for in terms of embodying the standards. They might talk about, they might just be so, just might understand and have applied and are looking for evidence like so deeply and so concretely that it shows an embodying of the standard. You'll also see in the level 4 exemplar how people specifically say like how they interacted with other staff members around it, and that would be a good example for you as well. But you're right, it is missing from the guiding questions, and perhaps it should be in there. Monica, let's make a note of that for next week.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and go on to the next one because I'm seeing we're at 10:54 right now. Okay, so this next one, level 4, we're checking all the boxes. A clear understanding, showing how the characteristic is applied, a reflection on professional learning, clear evidence of student growth, and the capacity to teach others. So let's see what this looks like. Now, I'm not going to read it. No one's going to read this one. Go ahead and read it on your own. And then in the chat box, we're going to go ahead and talk a little bit about it.
Leilani, are the links active in the actual slides or no?
They are not.
Okay.
And that is because these are archetypical exemplars that I wrote based on based on many different submissions.
Yeah.
So we didn't because these aren't real examples. The links are not live. But you know, it just requires us to kind of consider, when you think about the finding and documenting CRT impact session that Lars is going to do later on, he's going to show 15 plus examples of what the data could look like. And those are actual real examples. So I encourage you to join that session as well. Katie, I'm seeing you asking, would a score of 3 indicate that the teacher had evidence of student growth and a score of 4 show that they had closed the achievement gap? Not necessarily. There could be a score of 3 and they could say that we've closed the achievement gap using CRT this year. That closing the achievement gap is not specifically stated on the rubric. But that might show that the candidate is embodying the standard, that they're so proficient at being able to apply the standard that they've actually been able to close the achievement gap. And we've seen that in several examples of CRT certified candidates. I'm not saying that all the CRT certified candidates have gotten 4s in the past, but we've seen several get 4s in certain characteristics. And in those areas, they have narrowed or closed achievement gaps.
And just to clarify from Hollins, if you get a score of 2 in any characteristic, that would mean that a candidate is not certified, correct?
Yes, and let me just be more clear on that. If you get a 2 in one of the characteristics, that means that you won't be certified this year. That means that you will get a micro-credential in your strongest characteristic this year, but you will still get all of the recertification points of a certified candidate. It's just that the award goes from 1,000 to 500, so it's the micro-credential award. Then we would work with you to get you certified at the very next available opportunity based on further work. So we actually adjust the program for second year certification candidates, and we will do everything to support you in that case.
So again, clarification, a 3 shows clear evidence and deliberate impact of CRT, and a 4 shows that you can teach those practices to others.
I would say that that's accurate. That you embody it so much, that you're so deliberate that you can actually teach those practices to others, that you have taught it to others, or that you have so much passion around it that you could teach others.
That when Leilani is putting together a PD day and she's like, who can I use for characteristic 2? Your name comes to her mind.
Exactly. Yeah. Yep. Okay. So just for the sake of time, because it's 11 o'clock, I want to make sure that we get this other candidate assessment information to you. Again, if you have any other questions, you can always email me directly or schedule a Zoom with me or a coach, and we'd love to talk more. But here's some candidate assessment information that is really important that we want to share with you. So Monica, can you see this new slide? Just want to make sure. Okay.
Yeah.
Number 1, no later than April 8th, each applicant has to sign up for a portfolio presentation slot to meet with an assessment team. This will most likely take place on Zoom this year. All right, we still are figuring that out. Presentation dates are May 12th through 14th for the first assessment window and June 16th through 18th for the second assessment window. But portfolio presentation signups will happen from April 1st through the 8th. And I'll send out more information to the entire cohort about that.